Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales. I hope you found these episodes to be mostly firme so far. I'm always trying to improve my programs, so I greatly appreciate your suggestions and positive comments. I noticed that we're almost past the 10,000 subscriber mark. If you like what you've been watching, I really appreciate if you'd share this program with your friends and peers so we can blast past that 10K mark. Once again, I appreciate your support. We have been covering Mexican Mafia members over the past 60 plus years. Today, we'll start off with last names of F, as in Frank. George Poo Felix was from Rosemead. I believe he had a B number, and he was one of the individuals who were murdered by Choco Montillano and Alberto Beto / Cuate Valles, February 14, 1977, at Rocky Luna's house. Rocky Luna being a major figure from Hazard, who was one of the victims after the American Me movie came out. I will talk about him later and probably will do a solo episode on American Me, as I know quite a bit about that movie, the people involved in it, including many of the officers and inmates who played extras, as well as being personally invited by Edward James Olmos himself when I was vice president of the Chicano Correctional Workers Association at Sacramento County / Folsom Prison. Frank Playboy Fernandez was from King Cobras. I show he had a D number and was a mero who was housed at Sentinella in 2016, was later moved to High Desert Prison and is presently housed at Pelican Bay. Frank Sapo Fernandez was from Pacas and a longtime Mexican Mafia carnal. He had an early B number and was made sometime in the early 70s, was housed at Folsom Prison and indicted on a RICO case in 1998. I'm pretty sure he aligned with the Fox Tapia Vic Murillo car. Sapo was arrested in February 1999 and eventually sent to the ADX, where he's been housed for many years and is doing a life sentence. He is currently 76 years old. I'll be talking a little bit about his son in the next episode, who was Dominic Solo Gonzalez, who also claimed Pacas, but was killed in April 2016. At a Mexican restaurant located in Basa Grande territory. Michael Little Negro Fernandez is from Arta. I show he was convicted of a robbery in 1981 and sent to the California Youth Authority. He then paroled and immediately was popped for another robbery, whereby he acquired his C number. He did some time at San Quentin in 1985 through 1987, and I believe that's where he was made. He paroled in 1994, was convicted of auto theft, and came back with a K number. I believe he paroled on that also, but got popped later on a dope charge, and has had several parole violations, and at one time was housed at Tehachapi. I show he is no longer in custody. Raul Huero Crack, a.k.a. Greyhound Fernandez, was from the San Fernando Valley. He had a B number and was active in the MA from about 1980 through 2004, and I lost track of him after that. Alejandro Mo Fel Ramirez was from El Hoyo Maravilla. He had an early B number and was well respected at Folsom Prison. I remember talking to a lot of guys about Mo and how he was considered to be one of the leaders there. Here he is pictured in his earlier days with Chavo Flores along the wall with other carnales. Mo was released in 1977 and then came back. He was hit at Folsom Prison on November 15, 1985. Allegedly, he got into it with Alfie Sosa, who was not that big, but had a big mouth. And I didn't mention earlier, but there's another regla: never strike another carnal. Mo probably got fed up with Alfie's mouth, but what was done was done. He had some other issues. He also was in trouble for considering peace talks with the BGF, something that Joe Morgan was strongly against. I was told by Dave Martin, who was a program administrator there at Old Folsom, and who often had conversations about prison politics, there were two other individuals involved with peace talks with the BGF who got into trouble, and that being Nico Velasquez and Kilroy Roybal, both who also were said to have disrespected Joe Morgan. There are a lot of guys who are very envious of Joe. I'll probably do a special episode on him, because when I get to him, there's just way too much to talk about. I know a lot of people talk massa about him now, but I guarantee you they wouldn't have said anything to his face when he was on the yard. Mo was hit on November 15th, 1985 at Old Folsom by Danny Boy Pena and Stump Valencia while the door was held shut by Chuy Fernandez. This hit was ordered by Bevito Alvarez for his rule violation against Alfie. Like I said, I talked to a lot of guys about Mo, and a lot of them said they walked away from the MA, or if they're camaradas, they left the cause after that. Mo actually ended up being sent out to the UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento, whereby he pulled out his life support. My understanding from talking to some of the guards who were watching him, he felt if he couldn't be a canal, he didn't want to live anymore. Plus, he didn't want to have to look over his shoulder for the rest of his life, worried that they would finish him off. Mark Moose Fidel was inside. I showed he had a D number and was made MA sometime in the late 1980s after he was popped for a robbery charge. He paroled in 1991 and came back on another robbery charge in the mid-90s with a J number. I show he is currently housed at CMF Vacaville, being almost 70 years old. A lot of these old MA guys are dying off. If they're not killed by their own gang, a lot of times the hard life they lived using Chiva, which literally takes years off of their life. David D. Fiero is from Fontana, also known as Felony Flats. He had a C number and committed a murder on Mission Boulevard, where I cruised in my 1973 Monte Carlo many times. I have family members on my side and my wife's side that frequent that area. The murder allegedly took place at Trudy's Market, whereby the owner confronted Fiero near closing time and was killed. He caught a death sentence for that one and was on San Quentin's death row for many years. But he appealed his case and won in 2012, and his sentence was converted to life without parole. He was then held at Pelican Bay and shipped out to Salinas Valley State Prison, where he is currently housed. I think he may have had a brother named Louis. I'm not sure, but I remember a guy that was at least a camarada by that last name that I dealt with out on Beef Facility Yard at New Folsom. Oscar Coyote Figueroa Jaramillo was from San Diego. He had a B number and I understand had attempted 187 on an officer. He was housed at DVI in the mid-70s and paroled in 1978. He then came back with a D number, released again, and came back with a K number. A lot of these guys just can't stay out, often because they're drug addicted and have to commit robberies or deal dope to get some, and eventually get popped. I believe he was housed at the Corcoran SATF facility in the year 2000. He also was sent to the federal BOP and was released in October of 2000, but I lost track of him after that. Abelardo, aka Abi Fimbres Ramos, was from Brole. He came into CDC with B number 77030, and like many of these guys, especially from Southern California, was processed at CIM Reception Center. I'm not sure where he was classified to for that, but I show he was paroled in 1979. He then returned in 1981 and was housed at San Quentin, I believe on a new C number. He committed a robbery and may have been housed at Beef Facility. For some reason, I seem to remember this guy, but I'm not 100% sure that he was at New Folsom at one time in the late 1980s. But I showed he was paroled by 1996, and I lost track of him after that. So here's another one of those guys I'll mention that was at least a camarada, if not M, and that being Alfred III Wizard, aka Looney Flores, who is from El Monte Flores. I also have notes that he had ties to Menlo Park. He committed 3 murders. So either this guy was just a straight JCAT, or he probably did it on behalf of La M as a camarada at the very least. I show he was housed at CMC in 1999. He was housed at the San Bernardino County Jail in 2002 and then hit death row on the triple homicide and is still currently housed there. As far as Arthur Shark Flores, I'm not sure what barrio he claims, but I know he had a K number and was validated MA at least in 2004. I'm not trying to get nobody caught up, especially me. George Mumbles Flores, I show was MA by at least the early 80s. He paroled in 2012, and I lost track of him after that. There's also a different individual named George Caballo Flores. He was an MM member in Califas and then shipped out to Arizona, where he was considered to be a member of the old Mexican Mafia there. Today, my understanding is there's just one Mexican Mafia. The old guys were either taken care of or absorbed into the Mexican Mafia, commonly referred to as the new Mexican Mafia, which basically took over the system and had the majority of members. You can refer to my video on the Arizona Mexican Mafia in regards to how that unfolded. Louis Buff Flores was from Hawaiian Gardens. The buff actually was not because he worked out, which he did, but for buffalo head, because a lot of guys said his large noggin resembled the buffalo head. Güero Buff was just a kid when he thought up the idea of La M. But as I've stated in previous videos, this thing didn't just happen overnight. I have started organizations from the ground up. It takes a little time, often months, even years sometimes, to get things going. Güero arrived at the Dual Vocational Institute on July 24th, 1957. And that includes being processed. So, in all actuality, the Mexican Mafia didn't even get off the ground until about 1958. And then when Cheyenne Cadena came into the scene, it just took off from there and grew even more after Joe Morgan was convinced to join. Güero Buff always had problems with drugs and alcohol. His body probably was used to Pruno and not tequila. My understanding, this happened exactly one day after his release from Pelican Bay State Prison to home care. And he died on June 8th. 1991. Another gay I was mentioned, but I'm not saying he was MA because this is a very good example of how a guy can be a very close camarada, put up for membership, but not necessarily accepted by the entire organization or the shot callers that make things happen. And that would be Nelson Mula Flores from Mara Salvatrucha. I did verify that he was sponsored by Peanut Butter Ruiz, who was running things for La M down in Tijuana. And let me state for the record that some people say my information on him and the MS in the transnational gangs video was all wrong. There may have been some minor discrepancies, but that's what I'm talking about. Come on now, give me some credit. I know for a fact I've verified by dozens of officers who worked MS Task Force and worked the MA told me that was pretty good. It really boils down to a difference of opinion, not necessarily facts. So anyways, what I'm saying is Mula was considered to be a very close associate of La M, but I don't believe was ever accepted as one or validated. I believe Mula is presently held in a San Diego federal facility on some of the cases where he was running dope from Tijuas into San Diego, other parts of Califas, and according to his indictment, across the United States. Martin Negro, aka Chubby Fonseca, was from the San Diego area as well as having ties to Mexico. I showed he had a D number, was released, and was popped for dope in 1992. He eventually was released on the D number, but then came back on a V number for another drug case. And I lost track of him after that. Jesus Chuy Fo was from Norwalk, but I think also had ties to San Francisco. He had a couple B numbers and was born in 1944. Him and his family considered to be a major drug connection for La M. He was housed at Folsom in 1974 and apparently overdosed in February of 1976. Billy Hos Frisbee was from Planton, 14th Street, which has nothing to do with Norteños. You can see my West Side LA episode if you're not familiar with that particular old-time video. I understand that Hos was housed at San Quentin in the early 80s through mid-80s, but later on became one of the major figures in the pesetas, the 2 5s. There was Arthur Bear Fuentes, who had an A number and was involved in the shoe war in San Quentin in 1968. My documentation is that he fought on the side of La M when they fought the Nuestra Familia on the yard and in the units. So if he was not a member, he was at least a very close associate or supporter of La M. Freddy Smokey Huav Vuava is actually a Samoan Mexican Mafia gang member from the young crowd. He was involved in the murder of a LA County Sheriff's deputy in Linwood. Even though he's Samoan, he was well respected by the Carnales, and I believe he was made MA sometime after he hit death row. He was also involved in signing a peace treaty with the Nuestra Familia and is still housed at Q. And that is all for the last names of F, as in Frank. I hope you learned something new. And once again, if you disagree, please make sure to do so respectfully, and we'll sort out what is what and who is who. Thank you again for watching and supporting my channel. This is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.